I spent weeks saving for that dress. It wasn't anything extravagant. No glittering jewels, no designer tag, no famous brand. But it was mine. I had chosen every stitch, every seam, every fold with care. The lavender fabric shimmered softly in the light when I first laid it out on my bed, and I remember thinking how perfectly it captured me. Simple, overlooked, but quietly beautiful. My family would never understand that. To them, beauty was measured in price tags and brand names, in who had the most expensive gown or the loudest jewelry. I had grown up watching them value appearance over affection, money over meaning. Still, a part of me hoped, naively maybe, that when they saw me that day, they'd see something different. That maybe, for once, they'd be proud. The wedding was my cousin Emma's, and it had been the talk of the family for months. Everyone kept saying it would be the event of the year. Emma was marrying into wealth. Her fiancé came from a family that owned hotels, and my mother made sure to remind me of that every single day. "Don't embarrass us, Lucy," she said that morning as she looked at my dress hanging by the door. "Everyone will be watching." Her tone carried that familiar weight, the one that told me she already expected me to fall short. I'd learned long ago that in her eyes, I was always the one who didn't quite fit. My sister Rebecca was already downstairs, twirling in her pale pink gown that probably cost more than I made in a month. "You're really wearing that?" she asked when I entered the room. "It's brave. Brave." The word dripped with condescension. I smiled weakly and said nothing. I had no interest in arguing. I'd spent years doing that, defending my choices, my dreams, my dignity, and every time, I ended up the villain for daring to speak. The venue was breathtaking. A massive ballroom draped in white roses and gold ribbon, chandeliers glimmering like stars. Guests arrived in sleek cars and designer suits. I stepped out of the taxi, clutching my small purse, feeling suddenly tiny in the sea of luxury. My heels clicked softly on the marble floor as I entered, and for a fleeting moment, I felt proud. I'd done my makeup myself, soft eyeliner, a hint of shimmer, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I looked good enough. But then I heard it. The laughter. My aunt's voice, sharp and unkind, cut through the music. "Is that what she decided to wear?" she whispered to another relative, though loud enough that I could hear. "Looks like she borrowed it from a costume shop." My heart skipped. My palms went cold. I tried to keep walking, to act like I didn't hear, but the whispers grew. "She could have at least worn something in theme," one cousin said. "It's a wedding, not a garden party." My cheeks burned so hot I thought I might faint. I found a seat near the back of the hall, trying to disappear. I kept my posture straight, pretending to check my phone, pretending that I didn't notice the stairs. My mother glanced at me from across the room, her lips pressed tight. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. Her silence said it all. "You're embarrassing me again." I looked around, and it was like the entire room was built to remind me I didn't belong. The women's dresses shimmered with sequins and designer labels. Even the men wore watches that looked like they could buy a house. I looked down at my own wrist, bare except for the tiny bracelet I'd made from beads years ago. For a moment I regretted coming. Maybe I should have stayed home. Maybe it would have been easier to let them talk about me in my absence, rather than watch them laugh in my presence. During the ceremony, I sat quietly, forcing a smile when the bride walked down the aisle. Emma looked radiant in her gown, her happiness genuine. I wanted to be happy for her, but the bitterness in the air around me was suffocating. My sister kept glancing at me, smirking, leaning in to whisper to her fiancé. I saw him chuckle, trying to hide it, and my stomach twisted. When the vows ended and everyone stood to clap, I clapped too, but I felt numb. As the evening carried into the reception, I hoped the darkness might hide me a little. The lights dimmed, music filled the room, and laughter echoed through the air. But humiliation has a way of finding you even in the shadows. At dinner, I found myself seated at a nearly empty table near the corner of the hall, far from the center where my family and the couple sat. "We ran out of room," my aunt said when I approached the main table. "You don't mind sitting there, do you?" Her tone was sweet poison. I nodded politely, my throat dry. As I sat alone, I picked at the salad on my plate, pretending to be busy on my phone. Every time I looked up, I caught someone glancing my way, then turning to whisper to someone else. My sister's laughter rang out again, high and cruel. "Maybe she thought it was a tea party," she said loudly, and a few people chuckled. I could feel the heat crawl up my neck. I wanted to cry, but I refused to give them that satisfaction. So I smiled instead, a shaky, desperate smile that hurt my cheeks. It was in that exact moment, as I sat there swallowing my pride with my cold salad, that I heard a voice beside me. "Is this seat taken?" it asked, warm and steady. I looked up, startled. A man stood there, tall, composed, with kind eyes that seemed to notice the very thing everyone else overlooked: me. I blinked, unsure what to say. "No," I managed to whisper. He smiled and pulled out the chair, taking the seat next to mine. "I was beginning to think I'd never find a quiet corner," he said, glancing around the noisy hall. His tone carried no mockery, no pretense, just ease. I tried to respond, but my voice came out small. "You're not with the bride's side?" I asked. "Grooms," he replied. "I'm Ethan." His handshake was firm but not forceful. I gave my name and he nodded as if it meant something. Then, as his eyes moved across my dress, I braced myself for the inevitable comment, the polite pity or the disguised insult. But it didn't come. Instead, he leaned slightly closer and said softly, "You're stunning." My breath caught in my chest. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "What?" I stammered. He smiled, almost amused by my disbelief. "Your dress," he said. "It's beautiful. You look stunning." No one had ever said that word to me before, not like that. Not without an agenda, not out of pity. I felt my eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Thank you," I whispered, barely able to hold his gaze. He smiled again, the kind of smile that doesn't demand anything in return. And in that moment, something inside me cracked open. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was recognition. A stranger saw beauty where my own family saw shame. That truth hit me harder than any insult ever had. As the evening went on, Ethan and I talked. I was hesitant at first, but his calm confidence made it easy to open up. We spoke about travel, books, and small things that had nothing to do with appearances. I found myself laughing, a small, nervous laugh at first, then genuine. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed the sound of my own laughter. My mother's gaze burned into me from across the hall, but for once I didn't care. Ethan asked if I designed my dress myself. I nodded shyly. "I did," I said. "It's not perfect." He tilted his head. "It's perfect, because it's yours." The simplicity of his words silenced every cruel voice that had haunted me that night. My sister's mockery, my aunt's whispers, my mother's disappointment, they all dissolved in that moment. I realized how starved I'd been for a single ounce of kindness. Later, when the dance floor opened, he stood and extended his hand toward me. "Dance with me?" he asked. I froze. I could feel the weight of my family's eyes, waiting, watching, ready to laugh again. My instinct screamed to say no, but something deeper, something braver, told me to say yes. I took his hand. The music was slow, melodic, and as we moved under the chandelier's golden light, the world blurred. For the first time all evening, I forgot to feel small. I forgot to shrink. I just existed. When the song ended, he bowed playfully. "You're a natural," he said. I smiled for real this time. "You have no idea how long it's been since someone said something nice to me." He looked at me thoughtfully, then said, "Then maybe it's time someone did." When I finally returned to my seat, my sister passed by, sneering. "Having fun with your pity date?" she whispered. But her voice no longer carried the same power. I looked her straight in the eye and said softly, "Actually, yes." Her smirk faltered, and she walked away. I didn't win anything that night, not in the way my family measured success. But something inside me shifted. For the first time, I stopped trying to belong to them. I started belonging to myself. The stranger beside me hadn't just whispered a compliment. He'd given me a spark, a glimpse of the woman I could be if I stopped letting their cruelty define me. I didn't know it yet, but that night, the night they mocked my dress, was the night I began to sow my future. The night after the wedding felt like a dream that refused to end. When I finally got home, my mother didn't say a word about how I looked on the dance floor. She just brushed past me, muttering something about drawing unnecessary attention. My sister giggled as she climbed the stairs, whispering, "Don't let that pity date give you ideas." I ignored her, though the word stung. I locked myself in my room and sat on the edge of my bed, still in my lavender dress, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was a little messy from dancing, my lipstick had faded, and my shoes were scuffed, but there was something different in my face. I looked alive. I touched my cheek, tracing the faint smile still lingering there. For once, I didn't look broken. I didn't look like the background character in my family's story. I looked like me. Ethan's words echoed in my mind. "You're stunning." They weren't just words anymore. They were a seed buried deep in the soil of my self-doubt, waiting for courage to bloom. The following week, I went back to my routine: work, home, silence. I worked part-time at a small bookstore downtown, where the most excitement we had was when the air conditioning finally worked. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. I liked the smell of paper and the sound of pages turning. It reminded me that stories had power, even if mine still felt unwritten. One afternoon, as I was arranging the window display, I heard the doorbell chime. When I looked up, my heart skipped. Ethan stood there, wearing the same calm smile that had softened my shame that night. "You're here," I said, trying to sound casual but failing. "You sound surprised," he replied with a light chuckle. I promised I'd stop by, didn't I? I had almost forgotten that he'd mentioned he loved books too. He walked in, scanning the shelves, and for a few moments we just existed in that comfortable silence that only two introverts can share. He picked up a novel, read the back cover, and said, "You recommended this to someone the other night." I blinked. "You remember that?" He smiled. "I remember everything about that night." My cheeks flushed, and I quickly turned to straighten a stack of books that didn't need straightening. From that day on, Ethan began visiting the bookstore often. Sometimes he came to read, sometimes just to talk. I learned that he owned a small tech startup but preferred quiet places like this over flashy parties. "I've met too many loud people who say nothing," he once said, glancing at me knowingly, and I understood. Our conversations were never forced. They flowed like music. He asked about my interests, my dreams, and I told him how I'd always loved designing clothes. "I made my first dress when I was 15, I said one day. My mom laughed, said no one would ever wear something I made. He frowned softly. "And yet you did." "That takes courage," I shrugged. "I guess I just wanted to prove to myself that I could create something beautiful." He smiled, that quiet smile that made me feel like beauty didn't need validation. "You already did," he said. "You just didn't have anyone telling you." His words made my chest tighten with emotion. It had been years since anyone believed in me. Weeks passed and our bond grew. My family noticed, of course. My mother questioned me constantly. "Who is this man? You barely know him." My sister laughed, saying, "Maybe she thinks she's Cinderella now." I didn't answer. I didn't owe them an explanation. Ethan's friendship was like sunlight after a long winter, gentle, steady, and healing. He never tried to fix me. He just made me believe I wasn't broken. One evening, after closing the bookstore, he waited for me outside. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, and a soft breeze tangled my hair. "Do you trust me?" he asked suddenly. I hesitated. "I want to." He nodded, understanding more than my words could express. "Then let me show you something." He led me down the street to a small cafe that looked like it had been carved out of a storybook. The lights inside glowed amber, and the faint hum of jazz music floated through the air. "This is my favorite place," he said. "Whenever life feels too heavy, I come here. It reminds me that peace can exist in small corners." We sat by the window, sipping coffee as rain drizzled outside. I told him things I'd never told anyone. about the nights I'd overheard my mother comparing me to my sister, about the birthday they forgot, about how every success of mine was treated as luck, never effort. He listened, not interrupting, just watching with quiet empathy. When I finished, I expected pity, but instead he said, "You've survived so much, and yet you're still kind. That's rare, Lucy. Don't let them steal that from you." That night, as we said goodbye, something in me shifted again. I realized kindness didn't always come from family. It could come from strangers who saw what others refused to. Ethan became the mirror that reflected the version of me I'd stopped believing existed. But the kindness that warmed me also began to burn in my family's eyes. They noticed the changes, the new confidence in my voice, the way I dressed with quiet pride instead of apology. One Sunday dinner, my mother couldn't hold back. "You've been seeing that man again, haven't you?" she said coldly. I looked up from my plate. "His name is Ethan," I replied. "He's a friend." My sister laughed. "A friend? Please. You've always fallen too easily." My father, who rarely spoke during family conflicts, finally said, "Maybe he's good for her." "She looks happier," my mother scoffed. "Happy? She's delusional. Men like that don't stay with girls like her." The words sliced through me, but I kept my composure. "Maybe I'm not looking for him to stay," I said quietly. "Maybe I'm learning how to stand." The table went silent. For the first time in my life, I didn't cry when they tried to belittle me. I felt something stronger than hurt. I felt power. Days later, Ethan asked me if I'd ever considered pursuing design seriously. "You have talent," he said. "But more than that, you have heart." I laughed softly. "Heart doesn't pay bills." He leaned forward. "Neither does self-doubt." His words lingered with me long after he left. That night, I pulled out my old sewing machine from under the bed. Dust had gathered on it like the years I'd wasted hiding my dreams. I plugged it in, spread out the scraps of fabric I'd saved, and began to sew. At first, my hands trembled, but the hum of the machine steadied my heartbeat. Stitch by stitch, I created something new, a dress, this time in deep emerald green, bold and unapologetic. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. When I showed Ethan a few days later, his face lit up. "You did this?" he asked in awe. "You made courage look like art." I laughed, blushing. "It's just fabric." "No," he said softly. "It's freedom." As our friendship deepened, whispers spread through my family. My sister cornered me one evening as I left the bookstore. "You really think he's serious about you?" she sneered. "He's out of your league. You're just his charity project." I paused, meeting her glare. "If that's what you need to believe to feel better, go ahead." Her eyes widened, shocked by my calm. "You've changed," she muttered. I smiled faintly. I had to, and I walked away. For the first time, her cruelty didn't reach me. It bounced off the armor I had quietly built from self-worth. Ethan never knew how much he had done for me just by believing. He didn't try to rescue me. He reminded me I didn't need rescuing. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the cafe window, he said, "You know what I see when I look at you?" I rolled my eyes playfully. "Another lecture?" He smiled. "I see someone who's learning to stop apologizing for existing." I went silent because he was right. For years, I'd apologized for everything, my dreams, my looks, my failures, even my silence. But with him, I felt allowed to simply be. Months passed. My sewing improved. I began posting pictures of my designs online, small steps into a world I'd once been too afraid to enter. Ethan helped me set up a small website, refusing to let me downplay my talent. "You don't need permission to shine," he said. Slowly, orders trickled in, 1, then 2, then 10. Every sale was a small victory against the years of ridicule I'd endured. My mother still didn't acknowledge my work, and that was fine. I'd stopped needing her validation. One night, after finishing a design, I found an old photo of myself at the wedding. The lavender dress, the nervous smile, the lonely eyes. I looked at it for a long time before whispering, "You made it through." That girl in the photo had no idea that her pain would become the fabric of her strength. Ethan had been the thread that helped me stitch myself back together, but I was the one who picked up the needle. By the end of that year, I wasn't the same woman who sat at the corner table in humiliation. I had color in my cheeks, confidence in my step, and purpose in my heart. I wasn't just wearing dresses, I was creating them. And deep down, I knew that one day the people who mocked me would see the name Lucy on a dress tag and realize the irony. The girl they laughed at for her homemade gown would become the designer they couldn't afford. But that realization, that moment of sweet justice, would come later. For now, I had something more precious than revenge. I had peace. I had freedom. And most importantly, I had rediscovered the woman I was always meant to be. A full year had passed since the night of that wedding, the night my family mocked me and a stranger's quiet words stitched my broken confidence back together. I'd left home 3 months after that, packing my sewing machine, a small suitcase of clothes, and a heart that finally dared to dream. The day I closed the door of my childhood home, my mother didn't even come to say goodbye. My sister stood by the window, smirking as if waiting for me to come crawling back. But I didn't. I walked away with trembling hands and burning determination, promising myself that I would never again let their laughter define my worth. Life on my own wasn't easy. My tiny apartment barely fit a bed and a table, and some nights I ate instant noodles for dinner. But every evening, as the city lights shimmered through the cracked blinds, I sat at my sewing machine, threading new beginnings out of old pain. Ethan visited often, bringing food or coffee, sometimes just sitting quietly beside me while I worked. He never offered pity, only presence, and that was worth more than gold. He watched me sketch designs, cut fabric, and curse at crooked seams. When I'd sigh in frustration, he'd just say, "Perfection is overrated. Passion isn't." With his encouragement, I enrolled in a local design course. Nothing fancy, just evening classes that taught pattern cutting, color theory, and branding. The first day I walked into that room full of strangers, I felt small again. But this time it was a different kind of small, humble, not hopeless. I was surrounded by people who shared my dream, people who had also been told, "You can't." Every lesson ignited something inside me. I stayed late after class, practicing stitches until my fingers ached. My instructor, Ms. Harper, noticed my dedication and one night said, "You've got something rare, Lucy. You don't just sew fabric, you sew emotion." That sentence lit a fire in me that never dimmed. Soon I started selling small pieces online, handmade skirts and custom dresses. At first it was slow, one order every few weeks, then one a week. But when a customer left a review saying, "This dress made me feel beautiful again," everything changed. That one sentence was the echo of Ethan's words, and it became the foundation of my brand. I named it Stunning. Why Stunning? Ethan asked one night as we labeled packages. I smiled. Because it's the word that started it all. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes soft with understanding, then whispered, "Then it's perfect." My little online shop grew faster than I ever imagined. I'd wake up to dozens of orders, messages from women thanking me for designs that made them feel seen. I was working 16-hour days, exhausted but alive. I no longer chased validation. I was building something real, something mine. One evening, I received an email that made my hands shake. It was an invitation to showcase my collection at a local bridal fashion event. They wanted to feature upcoming designers, and someone had recommended my work. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just an opportunity. It was a full-circle moment. The same type of event that once humiliated my family, and me would now be the stage of my transformation. The following weeks were a blur of sketches, fabric rolls, and sleepless nights. Ethan insisted on helping, even learning how to thread a needle. "This is harder than coding," he joked, making me laugh when I needed it most. Together, we built something beautiful, 10 original pieces inspired by rebirth, soft lilacs for courage, emeralds for envy turned strength, ivory for peace, crimson for passion. Each color told a chapter of my story. The night before the show, I sat by the window, staring at the city skyline. and whispered to my reflection, "Tomorrow, they'll see me." Not out of revenge, but out of reclamation. The day of the event arrived in a haze of nerves and adrenaline. The hall was grand. Crystal chandeliers, red carpet, cameras flashing. Models rehearsed backstage, music tested through speakers, and my heart raced as I adjusted the final dress on the mannequin. "Lucy, they're calling for you," one of the organizers said, smiling. "You're up next." I took a deep breath, smoothing my hands over my dress, a simple black jumpsuit I had designed myself. I didn't need to hide behind luxury anymore. As I stepped into the hall, my eyes froze on the front row. My mother, my sister, my aunts, all seated together, their faces painted with confusion and disbelief. My cousin Emma, the bride whose wedding started it all, waved at me shyly. My stomach twisted, but I didn't falter. They were here, not because they supported me, but because the world was talking about me. When the lights dimmed and my brand name "Stunning" by Lucy flashed on the giant screen, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Soft piano music began to play, and the first model stepped onto the runway, wearing the lavender gown I had recreated, the same color as the dress they mocked me for. The audience gasped. Cameras clicked rapidly. Then came the rest of the collection, each piece bolder than the last. As I watched from backstage, tears filled my eyes. Every dress carried a piece of my journey, every stitch a silent rebellion against the voices that once told me I wasn't enough. I saw my mother whisper something to my sister, her hand trembling. My sister's jaw clenched, and for a moment she looked guilty. When the show ended, the applause was thunderous. The host called my name, and I walked onto the runway under the bright lights, trying not to cry. People stood, clapping, cheering. Cameras flashed as I waved, but my eyes sought only one face, Ethan's. He stood near the end of the runway, pride shining in his eyes. My mother rose slowly, as if seeing me for the first time. I stopped in front of her, calm and composed. "You've changed," she said softly, almost in disbelief. I smiled, the same calm smile Ethan had once given me. "No, Mom," I replied. "I just stopped letting you define me." My sister's eyes glistened, and for a brief second I saw the regret behind her jealousy. But I didn't need their apologies anymore. Their silence was enough. After the show, reporters asked for interviews, boutiques asked for collaborations, and strangers hugged me, saying my designs made them feel empowered. My heart swelled, but the loudest applause still came from Ethan. As I stepped down from the stage, he met me halfway, pulling me into a hug. "You were right," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I am stunning." He laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I never doubted it for a second. For the first time, I believed those words, not because someone else said them, but because I could finally see it myself. In the days that followed, my story spread online, a designer who turned mockery into mastery. My old classmates reached out, people who once ignored me now praising my courage. Even my mother called one evening, her voice hesitant. "Your show was impressive," she said. "We're proud of you." I smiled sadly, not out of spite, but acceptance. "Thank you," I replied, "but I've already made peace with my past." And I meant it. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant freeing myself from their power. My sister visited weeks later, awkward and quiet. She stood in my studio, surrounded by fabrics and sketches, and whispered, "I was cruel to you. I'm sorry." I looked at her, this woman who once thrived on my humiliation, and saw not a villain but a reflection of who I used to be, someone desperate for validation. "It's okay," I said gently. "We all grow differently." She nodded, tears welling, and hugged me. For the first time, I hugged her back. My life wasn't perfect after that. No fairy tale ending, no mansion or crown, but it was real. My designs found homes across cities, worn by women who felt beautiful in their own skin. Every time I saw someone smile while wearing something I'd made, I felt whole. Ethan and I grew closer, though love wasn't rushed. It was patient, steady, like the thread that had quietly bound our lives together since that first night. He often joked, "If they hadn't mocked you, maybe we'd never have met." I'd laugh, shaking my head. Then maybe I should thank them. But deep down, I already had, because their cruelty had become my catalyst. Sometimes I still think about that night at the wedding, the way the chandelier lights had reflected in my tears, the sting of whispered laughter, the stranger's voice that changed everything. Pain can be an artist too, sculpting resilience out of humiliation, and I was its masterpiece. Now, when I walk past mirrors, I no longer look away. I see a woman who survived, who thrived, who turned shame into elegance. And every time I sign a tag that reads "Stunning by Lucy," I remember the girl who once sat alone in a lavender dress and dared to believe she was worth more than their laughter, because she was. And she always will be.